Hey, welcome back to the channel and the dramatic reading of His Majesty's Dragon by Naomi Novik. This is Nick Sal here, and we're on chapter 5 already. Can you believe it? I remember starting this book going, oh man, this is going to be a lot of reading, a lot of videos. But if you've been sticking with me, congratulations. You've made it this far. I'd love to know in the comments, have you read this book before? Is this the first time you've ever heard the story, having it read to you? Let me know what you're thinking in there. And feel free to subscribe. If you haven't subscribed already, you get instant updates whenever I do some of these chapters. So without further delay, let's get right into where you left off, which is the start of chapter 5. The sky over Loch Laggan was full of low-hanging clouds, pearl gray, mirrored in the black water of the lake. Spring had not yet arrived. A crust of ice and snow lay over the shore, ripples of yellow sand from an autumn tide still preserved beneath. The crisp, cold smell of pine and fresh-cut wood rose from the forest. A gravel road wound up from the northern shores of the lake to the complex of the covert. And Temeraire turned to follow it up the low mountain. A quadrangle of several large wooden sheds stood together on a level clearing near the top. Open in the front and rather like half a stable in appearance, men were working outside on metal and leather. Obviously the ground crews, responsible for the maintenance of the aviators' equipment. None of them so much as glanced up at the dragon's shadow crossing over their workplace as Temeraire flew on to the headquarters. The main building was a very medieval sort of fortification. 4 bare towers joined by thick stone walls, framing an enormous courtyard in the front and a squat, imposing hall that sank directly into the mountaintop and seemed to have grown out of it. The courtyard was almost entirely overrun. A young regal copper, twice Temeraire's size, sprawled drowsing over the flagstones with a pair of brown and purple Winchesters, even smaller. These are the names of British breeds of dragon, if you haven't gathered that already. Pair of brown and purple Winchesters, even smaller than Volatilis. That was the courier dragon that, aka Volley, that Temeraire had met a couple chapters ago. Sleeping right on his back. 3 mid-sized yellow reapers were in the mingle, heaped on the opposite side of the courtyard, their white-striped sides rising and falling in rhythm. As Lawrence climbed down, he discovered the reason of the dragon's choice of resting place. The flagstones were warm, as if heated from below, and Temeraire murmured happily and stretched himself on the stones beside the yellow reapers as soon as Lawrence had unloaded him. A couple of servants had come out to meet him, and they took the baggage off his hands. He was directed to the back of the building, through narrow, dark corridors, musty-smelling, until he came out into another open courtyard that emerged from the mountainside and ended with no railings, dropping off sheer into another ice-strewn valley. 5 dragons were in the air, wheeling in graceful formation, like a flock of birds. The point leader was a long wing, instantly recognizable by the black and white ripples bordering its orange-tipped wings. I wish they had drawn drawings of this, right? I just want to picture that dazzling combination of colors and patterns on these make-believe fantasy animals in the story. Orange-tipped wings which faded into a dusky blue along their extraordinary length. A couple of yellow reapers held the flanking positions, that's on the sides, and the ends were anchored by a pale greenish copper on the left and a silver gray dragon spotted with blue and black patches on the right. Well, maybe flanking would be kind of instead of being covered from behind, so maybe it's kind of diagonally back from the sides a little bit. Copper on the left and a silver gray dragon spotted with blue and black patches on the right. Lawrence could not immediately identify its breed. Though their wings beat in a wholly different time, the relative positions hardly changed until the long wing's signal midwingman waved a flag. Then they switched off smoothly as dancers, reversing so the long wing was flying last. At some other signal Lawrence did not see, they all back-winged at once, performing a perfect loop and coming back into the original formation. He saw at once that the maneuver gave the long wing the greatest sweep over the ground during the pass, while retaining the protection of the rest of the wing around it, Naturally, it was the greatest offensive threat among the group, that long wing, because I think if you recall, or they'll certainly talk about it, that has some sort of something it can shoot out of its mouth. Usually, not every dragon has that, you learn from the story. So maybe it's acid or fire or something like that. So if the long wing is like the deadliest and the most potent of the dragons in this formation, they've obviously they've trained these dragons to protect and that deadliest dragon as that dragon gets positioned to do the most damage in whatever their maneuver is trying to do. Nitidus, you are still dropping low in the pass. Try changing to a 6-beat pattern in the loop. It was a deep, resounding voice of a dragon coming from above. Lawrence turned and saw a golden-hued dragon with the reaper markings in pale green and the edges of his wings deep orange, perched on an outcropping to the right of the courtyard. He bore no rider and no harness, save, if it could be called so, a broad golden neck ring studded with rounds of pale green jade stone. Lawrence stared. Out in the valley, the wing repeated its looping pass. Better, the dragon called approvingly. Then he turned his head and looked down. Captain Lawrence, he said, Admiral Powys says you would be arriving. You come in good time. I am Celeritas, training master here. He spread his wings for lift and leapt easily down into the courtyard. Lawrence bowed mechanically. Celeritas was a mid-weight dragon, perhaps a quarter of the size of a regal copper heavyweight. Smaller even than Temeraire's present juvenile size. He said, lowering his head to inspect Lawrence closely. The deep green irises of his eyes seemed to turn and contract around the narrowed pupil. Well, you are a good deal older than most handlers, but that is often all to the good when we must hurry along a young dragon. As in Temeraire's case, I think we must. He lifted his head and called out into the valley again. Lily, remember to keep your neck straight on the loop. He turned back to Lawrence. Now then. He has no special offensive capabilities showing, as I understand it? No, sir. The answer and the address were automatic. Tone and attitude alike both declared the dragon's rank, and habit carried Lawrence along through his surprise. So he's just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this dragon is giving orders, but Lawrence is so trained to follow orders and defer to rank, he just snapped right into it, even though he's surprised he's doing it. And Sir Edward Howe, this is Lawrence. And Sir Edward Howe, who identified his species, was of the opinion that it was unlikely he should develop such, though not out of the question. Yes, Celeritas interrupted. I have read Sir Edmund's work. He is an expert on the Oriental breeds, and I would trust his judgment in the matter over my own. It is a pity, for we could well do with one of those Japanese poison spitters, or waterspout makers. Now that would be useful against a French flemme de Gois. But heavy combat weight, I understand? He is at present some 9 tons in weight, and it is nearly 6 weeks since he was hatched, Lawrence said. Good, that is very good. He ought to double that, Celeritas said, and he rubbed his side of a claw over his forehead thoughtfully. So, all is as I have heard. Good. We will be pairing Temeraire with Maximus, the regal copper, currently here in training. The two of them together will serve as a loose backing arc for Lily's formation. That is the long wing there. He gestured with his head out at the formation wheeling in the valley, and Lawrence, still bewildered, turned to watch it for a moment. The dragon continued. Of course, I must see Temeraire fly before I can determine the specific course of your training. But I need to finish this session, and after a long journey he will not show to advantage in any case. Ask Lieutenant Granby to show you about and tell you where to find the feeding grounds. You will find him in the officers' club. Come back with Temeraire tomorrow, an hour past first light. This was a command, and acknowledgment was required. Very good, sir, Lawrence said, concealing his stiffness in formality. Fortunately, Celeritas did not seem to notice. He was already leaping back up to his higher vantage point. Lawrence was very glad that he did not know where the officers' club was. He felt he could have used a quiet week to adjust his thinking, rather than the 15 minutes it took him to find a servant who could point him in the right direction. Everything which he had ever heard about dragons was turned upon its head. That dragons were useless without their handlers, that unharnessed dragons were only good for breeding. He no longer wondered at all the anxiety on the part of the aviators. What would the world think to know they were trained, given orders by one of the beasts they supposedly controlled? Of course, considered rationally, he had long possessed proofs of dragon intelligence and independence in Temeraire's person. But these had developed gradually, over time, and he had unconsciously come to think of Temeraire as a fully realized individual, without extending the implication to the rest of dragonkind. The first surprise past, he could without too much difficulty accept the idea of a dragon as an instructor. So could I. But it would certainly create a scandal of extraordinary proportions among those who had no similar personal experience. So what he's saying is, because he knows what it's been like to get to know and treat Temeraire as an equal, as a companion, as a partner, as a friend, it's easier for him to be like, oh yeah, there's other intelligent dragons who are capable of giving orders and having wisdom worth following, and authority and leadership skills worth following. Of course, because I get it, because I've met Temeraire. The vast majority of Great Britain and the world probably does not have a personal relationship with other dragons, let alone the rare and sort of more intelligent breed like Temeraire is, and apparently Celeritas maybe as well. It had not been so long, only shortly before the revolution in France had cast Europe into war, since the proposal had been made by the government that unharnessed dragons ought to be killed, rather than supported at the public expense and kept for breeding. The rationale offered had been a lack of need at that present time, and that their recalcitrance likely only hurt the fighting bloodlines. Parliament had calculated a savings of more than £10 million per annum. The idea had been seriously considered, then dropped abruptly without public explanation. It was whispered, however, that every admiral of the corps stationed in the range of London had jointly descended upon the Prime Minister and informed him that if the law were passed, the entire corps would mutiny. He had previously heard the story with disbelief, not for the proposal, but for the idea that senior officers, any officers, would behave in such a way. The proposal had always seemed to him wrong-minded, but only as the sort of foolish short-sightedness so common among bureaucrats, who thought it better to save 10 shillings on sailcloth and risk an entire ship worth £6,000. Now he considered his own indifference with a sense of mortification. Of course they would have mutinied. Basically saying that these creatures they care about so much, their livelihood should be just executed. And these creatures are friends and comrades to the dragons who are in harness, or, like Celeritas, giving orders, and are part of the leadership structure here. Not that they can let anybody else really know about that in the wider world. Still preoccupied with his thoughts, he walked through the archway to the officers' club without attention, and only caught the ball that hurtled at his head by reflex. A mingled cheer and a cry of protest both went up at once. "That was a clear goal, and he's not on your team," a young man, barely out of boyhood, with bright yellow hair, was complaining. "Nonsense, Martin. Certainly he is, aren't you?" Another of the participants, grinning broadly, came up to Lawrence to take the ball. He was a tall, lanky fellow with dark hair and sunburnt cheeks. "Apparently so," Lawrence said, amused, handing over the ball. He was a little astonished to find a collection of officers playing children's games indoors, and in such disarray. In his possession of coat and neckcloth, he was more formally dressed than all of them. A couple had even taken off their shirts entirely. You can just see the difference in the discipline and the sort of culture between the Navy and the Aerial Corps. The furniture had been pushed pell-mell into the edges of the room, and the carpet rolled up and thrust into a corner. "Lieutenant John Granby, unassigned," the dark man said. "Have you just arrived?" "Yes, Captain Will Lawrence, on Temeraire," Lawrence said. He was startled and not a little dismayed to see the smile fall off Granby's face, the open friendliness vanishing at once. "The Imperial!" The cry was almost general, and half the boys and men in the room disappeared past them, pelting towards the courtyard. Lawrence, taken aback, blinked after them. "Don't worry," the yellow-haired young man coming up to introduce himself answered, his look of alarm. "We all know better than to pester a dragon. They're only going to have a look, though you might have some trouble with the cadets. We have around 24 of them here, and they make it their mission to plague the life out of everyone. Midwingman is Ezekiah Martin, and you can forget my first name now that you have it, if you please. And forgive me that I'm not fully giving everybody a British accent or sort of an English brogue to their voice. I just think, it's a little tedious to have me as an American do that for every single character, and I'd rather trot out some other accurate accents and voice modulations for you. So hopefully you don't mind that. Besides, representation matters today, right? So voice tones are going to be a little bit more globally diverse for my rendition here. Let's look at it that way, right? Yeah. Here we go, back to the book. Informality was so obviously the usual mode among them that Lawrence could hardly take offense, though it was not in the least what he was used to. "Thank you for the warning. I will see Temeraire does not let them bother him," he said. He was relieved to see no sign of Granby's attitude of dislike in Martin's greeting, and wished he might ask the friendlier of the two for guidance. However, he did not mean to disobey orders, even if given by a dragon, so he turned to Granby and said formally, "Celeritas tells me to ask you to show me about. Would you be so good?" "Certainly," Granby said, trying for equal formality, but it sat less naturally on him, and he sounded artificial and wooden. "Come this way, if you please." Lawrence was pleased when Martin fell in with them, and as Granby led the way upstairs, the midwingman's light conversation, which did not falter for an instant, made the atmosphere a great deal less uncomfortable. "So you're the naval fellow who snatched an Imperial out of the jaws of France. Lord, it's a famous story. The frogs must be gnashing their teeth and tearing their hair over it," Martin said exultantly. "I hear you took an egg off of a 100-gun ship. Was the battle very long?" "I'm afraid rumor has magnified my accomplishments," Lawrence said. "The Amitié was not a first rate at all, but a 36, a frigate, and her men were nearly falling down for thirst. Her captain offered a very valiant defense, but it was not a very great contest. Ill fortune and weather did our work for us. I can claim only to have been lucky." "Oh, well, luck is nothing to sneeze at either. We would not all get very far if luck were against us," Martin said. "Hello, have they put you at the corner? You'll have the wind howling at all hours." Lawrence came into the circular tower room and looked around his new accommodation with pleasure. To a man used to the confines of a ship's cabin, it seemed spacious, and the large, curved windows were a great luxury. They looked out over the lake, where a thin gray drizzle had started. When he opened them, a cool, wet smell came blowing in, not unlike the sea, except for the lack of salt, because remember, they're near a freshwater lake. His bandboxes and that's where his luggage was kept, were piled in a little haphazardly together beside the wardrobe. He looked inside this with some concern, but his things had been put away neatly enough. A writing desk and chair completed the furnishings, beside the plain but ample bed. "It seems perfectly quiet to me. I'm sure it will do nicely," he said, unbuckling his sword and laying it on the bed. He did not feel comfortable taking off his coat, but he could at least reduce the formality of his appearance a little by this measure. "Shall I show you to the feeding grounds now?" Granby said stiffly. It was his first contribution to the conversation since they had left the club. Oh, we ought to show him the baths first, and the dining hall," Martin said. "The baths are something to see," he added to Lawrence. "They were built by the Romans, you know, and they're why we are all here at all." "Thank you. I would be glad to see them," he said. Although he would have been happy to let the obviously unwilling lieutenant escape, he could not say otherwise now without being rude. Granby might be discourteous, but Lawrence did not intend to stoop to the same behavior. They passed the dining hall on the way. Martin, chattering away, told him that the captains and lieutenants dined at the smaller round table, then midwingmen and ensigns at the long rectangle. "Thankfully the cadets come in and eat earlier, for the rest of us would starve if we had to hear them squalling throughout our meals, and then the ground crews eat after us," he finished. Do you ever take your meals separately? Lawrence asked. The communal dining was rather odd for officers, and he thought wistfully that he would miss being able to invite friends to his own table. It had been one of his greatest pleasures, ever since he had won enough prize money to afford it. Of course, if someone is sick, a tray will be sent up, Martin said. Oh, are you hungry? I suppose you had no dinner. Hi, Tolly, he called. A servant crossing the room with a stack of linens turned to look at them with an eyebrow raised. This is Captain Lawrence. He's just flown in. Can you manage something for him? Or must he wait until supper? No, thank you. I'm not hungry. I was speaking only from curiosity, Lawrence said. Oh, there's no trouble to it. There's no trouble about it, the man Tolly said, answering directly. I dare say one of the cooks can cut you a fair slice or two and dish up some potatoes. I'll ask Nan. Tower room on the 3rd floor, yes? He nodded and went on his way without even waiting for a reply. There, Tolly will take care of you, Martin said, evidently without the least consciousness of anything out of the ordinary. He's one of the best fellows. Jenkins is never willing to oblige, and Marvell will get it done, but he'll moan about it so you'd wish that you hadn't asked. I imagine you have difficulty finding servants who are not bothered by dragons, Lawrence said. He was beginning to adjust to the informality of the aviators' address amongst themselves, but to find a similar degree in a servant both bemused him afresh. Oh, they're all born and bred in the villages here and thereabouts, so they're used to it, and us, Martin said, and as they walked through the long hall. I suppose Tolly's been working here since he was a squeaker. He would not bat an eye at a regal copper and a tantrum. A metal door closed off the stairway leading down to the baths. When Granby pulled it open, a gust of hot, wet air came out and steamed in the relative cold of the corridor. Lawrence followed the other two down the narrow, spiraling stair. It went down for 4 turns and opened abruptly into a large, bare room, with shelves of stone built out of the walls and faded paintings upon the walls, partly chipped away, obvious relics of Roman times. One side held heaps of folded and stacked linens, the other a few piles of discarded clothes. Just leave your things on the shelves, Martin said. The baths are in a circuit, so we come back out here again. He and Granby were already stripping. Have we time to bathe now? Lawrence asked, a little dubiously. Martin paused in taking off his boots. Oh, I thought we would just stroll through. No, Granby? It's not as though there is a need to rush. Supper will be only for a few hours. Supper will not be for a few hours yet. Sorry about that. Unless you have something more urgent to attend to, Granby said to Lawrence, so ungraciously that Martin looked between them in surprise, as if only now noticing the tension. Lawrence compressed his lips and held back a sharp word. He could not be checking every aviator who might be hostile to a Navy man, and to some extent he understood the resentment. He would have to win through it, just like a new midwingman fresh on board. Not in the least, was all he said, though he was not sure why they had to strip down merely to tour the baths. He followed their example, save that he arranged his clothes with more care into 2 neat stacks and laid his coat atop them rather than creasing it by folding. Then they left the room by a corridor to the left and passed through another metal door at its end. He saw the sense in undressing as soon as they were through. The room beyond was so full of steam he could barely see past arm's length, and he was dripping wet instantly. I'd like to be there. Steam room, steam bath is fantastic. If he had been dressed, his coat and boots would have been ruined, and everything else soaked through. On naked skin, though, the steam was luxurious, just shy of being too hot, and his muscles unwound gratefully from the long flight. The room was tiled, with benches built out of the walls at regular intervals. A few other fellows were lying about in the steam. Granby and Martin nodded to a couple of them as they led the way through and into a cavernous room beyond. This one was even warmer, but dry, and a long, shallow pool ran very nearly its full length. We're under the courtyard now, and there's why the Corps has this place, Martin said, pointing. Deep niches were built into the long wall at regular intervals, and a fence of wrought iron barred them from the rest of the room while leaving them visible. perhaps half the niches were empty. A niche is like a carved out sort of alcove in usually like a kind of a stone wall of some kind. Half were empty, the other half were padded with fabric, and each held a single, massive egg. They must be kept warm, you see, since we cannot spare the dragons to brood over them, or let them bury them near volcanoes or such like, as they would in nature. And so there's no space to make a separate chamber for them? Lawrence said, surprised. Of course there is space, Granby said rudely. Martin glanced at him and leapt in hastily before Lawrence could react. You see, everyone is in and out of here often, so if one of them begins to look a bit hard, we're more likely to notice it, he said hurriedly. Still trying to rein in his temper, Lawrence let Granby's remark pass and nodded to Martin. He had read in Sir Edward's books how unpredictable dragon egg hatching was, until the very end. Even knowing the species could only narrow the process down to a span of months, or, for the larger breeds, years. We think the angle-wing over there may hatch soon. And that would be famous, Martin went on, pointing to a golden-brown egg, its sides faintly pearlescent and spotted with flecks of brighter yellow. That is Adversaria's get. She's the flag dragon of the channel, at the channel. So like there's a flagship, the biggest battleship that they have. She's the flag dragon, the main mightiest dragon that the commander rides on. It's kind of the leader. I was a signal ensign aboard her, fresh out of training, and no beast in her class can touch her for maneuvering. Both of the aviators looked at the eggs with wistful expressions, longingly. Of course, each of those represented a rare chance at promotion, and one even more uncertain than the favor of the Admiralty, which might be courted or won by valor on the field. So they're saying, Lawrence, at least, or people like him in the Navy, if the admirals liked you, they may pick you to be the captain or choose you to be the captain of this next ship. Here, it's either the dragon picks you or it doesn't. And you get one shot at that, it sounds like. Have you served with many dragons? Lawrence asked Martin. Only Adversaria, and then in Lacrimanas. He was injured in a skirmish over the channel a month ago, so here I am on the ground, Martin said. But he'll be fit for duty again in a month, and I got a promotion out of it, so I shouldn't complain. I just made midwingman, he said proudly. And Granby here has been with 4, is that not right? Who before Laetificat? Exercius, Flutare, and Actonius, Granby answered very briefly. But the first name had been enough. Lawrence finally understood, and his face hardened. The fellow likely was a friend to Lieutenant Days. At any rate, remember, Lieutenant Days was the guy who tried to get Temeraire to switch over and let him be his rider, and he didn't take it well, and he said a bunch of stuff to Lawrence when he came back, and he was venting because he got passed up. The two of them had been the equivalent of shipmates until recently, and it was now clear to him that Granby's offensive behavior was not simply the general resentment of an aviator for a naval officer shoehorned into his service, but also a personal matter, and thus in some sense an extension of Day's original insult. Lawrence was far less inclined to any slight for such a cause, and he said abruptly, "Let us continue, gentlemen." He allowed no further delays during the remainder of the tour, and let Martin carry the conversation as he would, without giving any response that might draw it out. They came back to the dressing room after completing the circuit of the baths, and once dressed again, Lawrence said quietly but firmly, "Mr. Granby, you will take me to the feeding grounds now. Then I may set you at liberty." He made it clear to the man that the disrespect would not be tolerated. If Granby were to make another fling, he would have to be checked, and better by far that it were to occur in private. "Mr. Martin, I'm obliged to you for your company and your explanations. They have been most valuable." "You're very welcome," Martin said, looking between Lawrence and Granby uncertainly, as if afraid of what might happen if he left them alone. But if Lawrence made his hint quite unmistakable, and despite the informality, Martin seemed to be able to see that it had nearly the weight of an order. "I will see you both at supper, I imagine. Until then." In silence, Lawrence continued with Granby to the feeding grounds, or rather, to a ledge that overlooked them at the far end of the training valley. The mouth of the natural cul-de-sac was visible at the far end of the valley, and Lawrence could see several herdsmen there on duty. Granby explained in a flat voice that when signaled from the ledge, these would pick out the appropriate number of beasts for a dragon and send them into the valley, where the dragon might hunt them down and eat, so long as no training flight was in progress. "It is straightforward enough, I trust," Granby said in conclusion. His tone was highly disagreeable, and yet another step over the line, as Lawrence had feared. "Sir," Lawrence said quietly. Granby blinked in momentary confusion, and Lawrence repeated, "It is straightforward enough, sir." He hoped it would be enough to warn Granby off from further disrespect. But almost unbelievably, the lieutenant answered back, saying, "We do not stand on ceremony here. Whatever you may have been used to in the Navy, I have been used to courtesy. Where I do not receive it, I will insist at least on the respect due to rank," Lawrence said, his temper breaking loose. He glared savagely at Granby and felt the color coming into his face. "You will amend your address immediately, Lieutenant Granby, or by God I shall have you broken for insubordination. I do not imagine that the Corps takes quite so light a view of it as one might gather from your behavior." Granby went very pale. The sunburn across his cheeks stood out. "Yes, sir," he said, and stood sharply at attention. "Dismissed, Lieutenant," Lawrence said at once, and turned away to gaze out over the field with arms clasped behind his back until Granby had left. He did not want to even look at the fellow again. With the sustaining flush of righteous anger gone, he was tired and miserable to have met with such treatment. In addition, he now had to anticipate with dismay the consequences he knew would follow on his having checked the man. Granby had seemed on their first instant of meeting to be friendly and likable by nature. Even if he were not, he was still one of the aviators, and Lawrence was an interloper. Granby's fellows would naturally support him, and their hostility could only make Lawrence's circumstances unpleasant. But there had been no alternative. Open disrespect could not be borne, and Granby had known very well that his behavior was beyond the pale. Lawrence was still downcast when he turned back inside. His spirits rose only as he walked into the courtyard and found Temeraire awake and waiting for him. "I'm sorry to have abandoned you so long," Lawrence said, leaning against his side and petting him, more for his own comfort than Temeraire's. "Have you been very bored?" "Not at all. No, not at all," Temeraire said. "There were a great many people who came by and spoke to me. Some of them measured me for a new harness, although also I have been talking to Maximus here, and he tells me we are to train together." Lawrence nodded a greeting to the regal copper, who had acknowledged the mention of his name by opening a sleepy eye. Maximus lifted his massive head enough to return the gesture, and then sank back down. "Are you hungry?" Lawrence asked, turning back to Temeraire. "We must be up early to fly for Celeritas, that is the training master here. So you will likely not have time in the morning." "Yes, I would like to eat," Temeraire said. He seemed wholly unsurprised to have a dragon as training master, and in the face of his pragmatic response, Lawrence felt a little silly for his own first shock. Of course Temeraire would see nothing strange in it. Lawrence did not bother strapping himself back on completely for the short hop. Oh, wait, no, I'll just pause there. So the last sentence was, of course Temeraire would not see anything strange in it. We're at the top of the page. I'm out of time. But we did get a good way through. There's still a few more we still have 6 or 7 or 8 pages before we get through Chapter 5. So maybe in the next session we'll get through Chapter 5 and maybe on to Chapter 6. But thanks for sticking with me. Once again, give it a good old subscribe button if you want to get instant updates as I continue the book, and always leave me comments. Hope you enjoy it. This is a labor of love. I do this primarily for my kids, so I can read to them virtually even when I'm not around, and I hope that you and the young at heart or your family can also enjoy the content. Who doesn't love a good story and having a good story hopefully read to them decently well? Thanks for watching.